Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mumey, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to episode 133 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson Mumey. Really glad that you're with me today. We are wrapping up our countdown to the February 2017 exam, and when this episode releases, we're just a little under a week until those tests, and so for those of you taking the exam, we certainly want to wish you all the best. I think you're going to find today's message to be helpful. Certainly for anybody who's preparing for a bar exam, I think it's going to be helpful because we're going to be talking about 5 questions that you should ask that will empower you rather than disempower you. Sort of the difference between a low value question and a high value question. I think you're going to find it pretty helpful and useful. And speaking of helpful, last week's episode, 132, was about keeping perspective with a couple weeks to go before the exam. I guess I hit a nerve there because we've been doing this podcast for well over a year now, and we had the single largest one-day total of downloads we've had in the entire history of the podcast for that particular episode. In fact, there were more downloads on one day of episode 132 than I think we had probably in the entire first month or second month of doing the podcasts. So I appreciate all of you who've been listening and telling their friends and fellow bar takers about us. I walked into a Starbucks the other day, ordered my drink. A guy was sitting there studying using one of the big box bar review materials. He heard my voice, he looked up and he said, "Hey, aren't you the guy on the podcast?" So there you go. I have a face that was built for radio. So I'm really excited to be in this medium of the podcast, and I'm really glad to share the time with you. If you're not familiar with us, if this is your first time with me, welcome. We're glad you're here. I invite you to check out all of the past recordings, and you can find them in a couple of places, but you can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com, click on the button for podcasts, and you will see all of the episodes along with show notes. You can also subscribe from there, or you can subscribe from Apple iTunes, or you can go to iHeartRadio, any of those locations, and subscribe. And once a week, we'll put out these episodes, and I hope you continue to find them of value. Love to also get your honest ratings and reviews for those of you that have been listening. It certainly helps us gain a wider audience, and I appreciate that. There's plenty of information to share here. Now, we know that many of you who are listening will be taking the exam next week. So for a minute, I just want you to turn your brains off. I want to talk to those of you that are taking the exam in July 2017 or sometime in February or sometime in 2018. And for you, I want to invite you specially to a live webinar that I'm doing on Thursday, February 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's 12 noon Pacific time. We're going to be talking about how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. These are the 4 powerful steps to pass the bar, guaranteed. And I think you're going to find it really useful information. It's a 90-minute jam-packed webinar, opportunity to ask questions and engage with me live in that setting. Now, to register, it's completely free. You just need to go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com, click on the link to save your seat, and we'll see you Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. If Thursday doesn't work for you at that particular time, you'll also see a button on our front page. Just scroll down a little bit further for an on-demand version of the same material. You'll get all the same information. The only difference is I'm not there live to answer questions. So you could do it either way. We'd love to have you with us and to get this information to find out how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Now, for everyone, those of you who are taking the February 2017 exam, you can come back now because I want to talk about some things that I think are really relevant for you a week before the exam, as well as all of our listeners as they think about their bar studies generally. And I want to give a hat tip to a couple of people that I listen to pretty regularly. One of them is Amy Porterfield. If you're not familiar with her, she is really a genius in the online education space and one of my heroes. I've totally got a fanboy crush on Amy Porterfield. But in any event, she just did an episode recently with one of her mentors and heroes, Marie Forleo, who you might have seen on Oprah or with Richard Branson. And Marie Forleo is also really well known and well thought of in the online educational space. In any event, they were talking about something that they called low value and high value questions for entrepreneurs. And it got me to thinking about that same methodology for bar takers, because right before the bar exam, I find that bar takers can get themselves into a position of asking what I would describe as low value questions. These are questions that don't help, don't get you any further along the road, don't improve your mindset, and generally cause you to feel defeated and discouraged before you step into the test room. And I wanted to not just identify those, but I also wanted to give you what I would think of as high-value questions that you might use to replace those, so that at least over the next week, for those taking the exam right now, you've got some different ways to be thinking. And for those of you taking the exam later, it's a way to program yourself right from the beginning to be asking the right questions, because it's so easy to get into this mindset of asking the wrong questions. So I identified 5 of these low-value questions, and then I tried to come up with 5 better questions that I thought would empower you. So if everybody's ready, let's jump in and just dive right into this. The first of the low-value questions, the one that I hear from students a lot at this point, if they're getting close to the exam within a week or two, is the question, why don't I do as well as other people on, and then you fill in the blank, MBE 1 or essay writing or doing performance tests or my practice multistates or whatever it might be. And maybe you felt that way. Maybe you thought of yourself in comparison to others. I know that it's a part of the law school phenomenon, that in law school we tend to look around and go, wow, look at all these brilliant people. I vividly recall, even now, 30-some years later, sitting in my first study group at Georgetown and looking around, and the people in my study group, let's see, there was the heir to the Utz potato chip factory. There was Ted Kennedy's chief of staff for medical affairs. There was a jazz piano player who just finished a year-long tour with Billy Joel. And I was a former broke Amway distributor. Are you kidding me? Really? One of these things is not like the others. And I got into this game early on of trying to compare myself. Well, that was really a self-defeating discussion. And when I stopped doing that, when I stopped taking shots of what Marie Forleo calls compare Schlager, right? Hey, give me another shot of that compare Schlager. I began to realize that I really had a lot going for me. And as it turned out, I did pretty well for myself, as did all my cohorts from back in the day. But when you ask this low-value question around the bar exam, when you're comparing your performance to others, it's really a no-win, because you don't know where that other person is coming from. You don't know what challenges or difficulties they've faced. You don't know what they've done to get to this point. And when you start looking just at the results that somebody says they've got in your big box bar review, or if you're in our course and you see somebody posting in our private Facebook group about a success they've had, well, most people are pretty good about encouraging and supporting, but I think there's a part of many of us that goes, well, why am I not doing that well? So that's the low value question. I don't think I have to say a lot more about that. I'm pretty sure it resonates with a lot of people. So what's the high value question that you could replace that with? When you're thinking to yourself, why am I not doing as well as others or somebody else? I think that the better question to ask is, what's my current reality? What's my current reality? Not my current mythology, but in reality, where am I? Because what I might discover is I'm actually doing pretty well. I've improved my work from where I was before. And, how do I, how do I continue with that? And we're going to talk more about that. But just in general, what's going on right now? How many answers am I getting correct? How is my essay writing compared to where it was before? What am I doing in terms of my study? How many hours am I putting into my study? What's my reality around the other challenges in my life? Maybe they're financial or personal, the things that maybe for some of you they're health problems. Those things help determine your current reality, and they take your focus off of other people, other bar takers. And frankly, why should you care about other bar takers? And they put them on you and your reality. So one of the things that we encourage people to do is simply to take a scale of 0 to 10 and assign themselves a current reality number. 0 being the worst, 10 being the best. Where are you right now? And in a moment, I'm going to get to a question to ask about that current reality. I think it'll surprise you. But for right now, I think it's enough to just pick that number and say, where am I? Now, another way to ask this high value question about your current reality is to also ask, what did I have to do to get to this point? And the reason I want you to ask that question is that the answer will be that you had to win a lot. I mean, think about it. You had to get through high school. You had to graduate and go to college, which meant for most of you probably taking the SATs or the whatever exams they give these days in college. I'm so far away from it, I don't really know anymore. You had to get from college either into the workforce or perhaps into law school. And for the law schools, you had to do your LSATs or you had to get accepted and go through the admissions process. You then had to survive 3 or 4 years or more of law school and graduate from law school. When you think about all of that, that makes you a winner. Compared to most Americans, you're a winner. You've done more than most people. You have more education than most people. You've been more successful than most people. So if you're going to take those shots of Comparschlager, it's a question of who do you want to compare to? And if you compare to most of the people that are in the world, that are in the community, that are around you, that are your neighbors, well, the current reality is you're already a winner. Now, I know some of you are thinking to yourselves, well, he doesn't know me. I failed the bar exam X number of times. Okay. But just to be in a position to fail the exam already puts you way ahead of other people. I cannot tell you how often I've talked to somebody who tells me a story of having grown up in a relatively poor environment or in a foreign country. And they had very little opportunity for educational advancement or success. And yet they overcame that. And we've done some great stories and interviews with some of those students on previous episodes of the podcast. And in those stories, one of the things you hear over and over again is that at some deep level, individuals began to realize that they were successful and they were winners, even if they had failed the bar exam. Just to get to a point to take the bar exam meant that they had won far more than the average person does. And then it's just that last hurdle of getting over the bar. And so if you're feeling bad because you think you're not doing as well as someone else, that's obviously not helpful or productive for you. Ask yourself, what's my current reality and what did I have to win to just get to this point? And by focusing on some of those wins, I think you'll be really surprised at how your attitude and your perspective can shift. So that's the first of our low value questions and high value replacements. A second low value question that I hear pretty frequently right now is, oh man, why didn't I start sooner? Why didn't I get underway sooner? I mean, I bought the course and I procrastinated, I sat on it, or I waited to purchase until too late, or I didn't really get serious about my studies until just a few weeks ago. Why didn't I start sooner? Well, it's a good question, but it's a low value question because you can't change it, obviously. So how do you replace it? What should you be asking instead of the why didn't I start sooner question? I think right now it's really simple. The replacement question should be, what do I need to know and learn today to improve? What do I need to know and learn today to improve? You see, what we want to do is move your focus away from regrets over the past. Regrets, I've had a few. You get the idea. But when it comes to studying, most people do have some regrets. There are some things that they wish they could have done differently. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you do today. And so the question you want to start your day with is not, well, why didn't I start sooner, which we would call the Eeyore approach to studying. And instead what we want is the Piglet or Tigger approach. Oh boy, it's a great day. Let's go. What do I need to know and learn today? See, every day between now and the exam is an opportunity for you to learn and grow. Now, that may be accelerated or magnified or amplified for those of you taking the test in February. But if you're taking the test in July 2017, you can ask exactly the same question. What do I need to know and learn today? Just focus on today. And if that's too much for you, what do I need to know and learn in this next hour of study or this next study session? That's all you want to be focused on. You don't want to be looking in the rearview mirror. And the fact of the matter is, when people start asking the why didn't I start sooner question, what they're really doing is trying to give themselves a cop-out, an easy escape route for the failure that they think is coming. In other words, well, I would have succeeded if I'd started earlier, but I didn't, and so I know I'm not going to succeed, and that's the reason why. And it makes perfect sense, because we'd always much rather protect our egos, not in a bad way, but in a self-preservation way. And it's easier to say, well, I made a mistake about when I started, than to say I'm just not good enough or talented enough. And the truth is neither of those things. It's not a question of being good enough or talented enough, and it's not exclusively a question of when did you start. It's really what you did with the time you have. So put your focus today on, what do I have to learn today? What do I need to know today? What do I have to learn in order to get better today? Make that list, get that in your mind, and start working through that. And so you may want to literally make a list before a study session based on the topic you're studying of the things that you feel you need to learn and know in this session, and then check them off as you go along. When you do that, you'll find your focus has shifted and you stop thinking about the regrets about why you didn't start sooner. So our high value question here, what do I need to know and learn today? Okay, question number 3. This is a tough one, particularly for those who find themselves asking it. Question number 3, that's a low value question, why do I keep failing the bar? Now, this is a really hard question for repeat bar takers, particularly in the week before the exam. It seems to come up like a bad case of acne for a teenager, right before the big date or the big prom, zits everywhere. I mean, why do I keep failing? I think that the reality here is that we start focusing on our failures, on our mistakes, on the things that didn't work. Now, you remember in our question number 1, when I was talking about comparing to others, I asked you what's your current reality, and I wanted to give you a couple of minutes to kind of think about that, and hopefully you gave yourself a number, because the high value question we're going to use for those of you who ask, why do I keep failing? You've picked your current reality, and let's say that number for you is a 5. We'll just pick the middle of the scale. It doesn't really matter where. The question that you want to ask is, why did you give yourself such a high score? Why so high? Now, that's an odd question to ask, because if you gave yourself a 5, let's say, you might have been thinking to yourself in the low value sense, well, look at all the things I'm not good at. I'm not good at essay writing. I'm not good at standardized test taking. I'm not good at X and Y and Z. But we flip that on its head. And if you attend the free webinar that we're doing, I'm going to talk about this in much greater depth, because we started this process at Celebration School over 25 years ago, and it's called a success-based approach to learning. It's extraordinarily effective. When you ask why so high, what you're really saying is, let's catalog your skills and resources. So why did you give yourself a 5 and not a 4 or 3 or a 2? And the answers that you might give would be things like, well, I've been studying every day. I went to law school. I'm a smart person. I'm trying really hard. I've got a good attitude. It could be any number of things. And in fact, almost a limitless number of things. When you ask yourself, why so high? What you're doing is changing the focus from the past, where you ask, why do I keep failing? What's wrong with me? Which is the problem-based approach to learning, to a success-based approach. In a success-based approach, once you've asked and identified why so high, then you want to build on those things. Why so high? Well, I was a good writer before I went to law school. Good. Do more of that kind of writing. Don't ask yourself, why did I fail, or why do I keep failing? That's the prescription for disaster, isn't it? And so when you start cataloging your resources, the things that you can do and that you do well, the things that you have an ability and a skill set in, that's what generates the confidence and the enthusiasm and the base for the work that you're going to do. So I think you can start to see how these high-value questions work together. We ask what's our current reality, and we catalog the fact that we had a lot of wins to get here. And then we ask, what do I need to know and learn today? And then we ask, well, why are my scores, why is my current reality so high? What resources do I have right now in my studies that I can build on? What can I do better? Perhaps you're someone that does really well on multistate and on standardized multiple choice questions. Well, that's great. Then you know that by improving that score even more, it will lift up your writing scores and you can make even greater progress. You see, when you ask the question about why you keep failing, in a sense, you doom yourself to more of that failure. And when that happens, it's one of the really sad things that I see in people is that they simply conscribe to themselves failure before they walk into the exam. They go to the test expecting to fail. And if that's the case, that is the lowest of low value questions. You don't want to keep asking, why am I failing? Why do I keep failing? You want to focus on, what am I doing right and how can I do more of that? And that's what the why so high question is. And for those of you taking the exam later in the year or next year, we're going to talk a lot more about that in Thursday's webinar. So I really hope you'll join me for that discussion. All right, we've got 2 more low value questions that I want to cover. Number 4, oh, this one is great. Why do I have to cram? Right? I got to cram. Why do I have to be cramming? That's the low value question. I mean, here we are a week before the exam, or maybe you're waiting until July and you're saying, well, I'm going to cram. I got to cram. Okay, that is a totally low value question because cramming, as we've talked about in other episodes, most recently when we talked about in episode 130, spaced repetition, the opposite of cramming, cramming is not successful. So how do we replace that question about, oh my gosh, I've got to cram for 16, 18 hours today? Here's the question I want you to ask instead. What do I already know and how do I express it on the exam? Whoa, that's really different. Cramming says, I've got to put more into my head. I mean, I've got to cram. I've got to put more in. I've got to feed more junk and data into my head. And in order to go in, I've got to squeeze it in somehow, and it's probably going to push something else out. And what am I going to do then? And the parade of horribles begins. The question I think you should be asking is, what do I already know? I don't have to relearn that material. If I know it, I know it. And I'm not talking about memorizing. And for those of you that have been following me, I've never talked about memorizing. So I'm talking about knowing. What do I already know? And then the key is, how do I express that on the exam? In other words, if I'm taking an essay question, I want to express what I know through the way that I write about arguments and the law and reaching conclusions. That's a different set of skills than on a multiple choice exam in which there's one answer that's better than the other 3. Not necessarily right or perfect, but better than the others. And so I have a different set of skills that I want to express, and I want to prepare for those skills differently. If there's a performance test on your exam, you clearly want to prepare for that differently than for an essay or for the multiple choice part of your exam. And so when you ask yourself, what do I already know? You catalog what you know. You catalog not only why your current reality is so high, but what do you know? And then you say, how do I express those things that I know on the exam? Well, what that's going to lead you to is doing some practice essays, taking some practice multiple choice exams, writing some practice performance tests in order to get the opportunity to express those skills on the exam. When you use this last week to tone up or tighten up the work, to take what you know and show how to express it most effectively, you're going to the exam in a different state of mind. You're not exhausted from cramming. You're not physically and mentally worn out. But in fact, you're really coming in with a lot of enthusiasm and energy. I describe this to my students as the difference between trying to get a plane to take off the ground, which takes a lot of energy, a lot of thrust, a lot of movement and motion, to landing the plane, which is really more about a controlled, disciplined glide down and touching down on the runway. And the best partakers at this point are landing the airplane. Those of you who are trying to still get into takeoff mode because you're cramming are going to find yourselves really at a deficit and at a disadvantage on the exam. So if you've been talking about, oh gosh, I got to cram this week, or I've got to cram for the next 6 months, that's the wrong question. The question is, what do you already know and how can you express it effectively on the exam? Okay, so that's our 4th. Our 5th and final low value question, to be replaced by a question that I think can empower you. This one is so classic, and I talked about it last week with, in a sense, about keeping perspective, and I told my students on Friday that this is what we call Irrational Weekend, the one that just passed, this 2 weekends before the bar. And the reason I call it that is because the low value question that some people start asking is, why is everything going wrong? I'll just let that one settle for a minute. Why is everything going wrong? I mean, I had a student who called me and said, I got up to take the kids to school this morning, and the car wouldn't start, and the dog was throwing up on the sofa, and and goes through this whole parade of horribles, and said, why is everything going wrong? Well, what's the question that I think you should ask? Get ready, here we go. How can you take full responsibility for your own outcomes? Now, that might strike you as being a very odd juxtaposition, because most of us tend to feel pretty beleaguered and put upon and, in some ways, really taken advantage of, victimized by what's going on right now. If you're taking the bar exam in a week, my guess is you have some feelings of being a victim. This is not what you would choose to do with your life or your time right now. It seems like an unfair system, and in many ways it is. However, being a victim will not allow you to pass the bar exam. I cannot recall a time when I had a student that I really thought felt victimized that went on to pass. It just doesn't correlate. The people who pass the bar are the ones that take full responsibility for their own outcomes. Now, let me be very clear about this. Taking responsibility for your outcomes doesn't mean taking responsibility for passing the bar. Actually, that's not your responsibility. That's the bar examiner's responsibility. They get the opportunity and the responsibility to grade you. Your responsibility is to go to the exam and do the very best work you can do for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it might be. By taking full responsibility for your outcomes, your outcome is to produce during that test the best quality work that demonstrates what you know and have learned, not what you've memorized, not what you recite, not what you can spit out because you crammed, not any of that frantic, crazy, manic mess. Instead, it's taking responsibility for what you can control. And what can you control? Well, you can control yourself. You cannot control the dog, cats, children, car, barista, other drivers, bar proctors, crazy stuff. For years, I've talked about the insanity of the Florida bar exam. To me, they are the masters of mind games. Everything from the armed uniformed state troopers to pat you down before you walk into the room, to the armored car that's parked in the middle of a second floor conference room. It's sort of like a TV reality game show. It's bring the tests out of the armored car truck. I mean, really? Get real, guys. Hardly necessary. I can see the headline now, crazed bar takers storm room, overpower guards, and grab the tests. I mean, really? Come on. In any event, when people get into that mindset that they are victims and everything is going wrong right now, and it feels like everything's going wrong, the question you have to stop and ask yourself is, wait a minute, whoa, how do I take full responsibility for my own outcomes? How do I control how I respond and how I work? When you take responsibility instead of being a victim, everything changes. Now it's your responsibility to get to the exam room on time and be prepared. It's your responsibility to do the work that you have to do. It's your responsibility to demonstrate your skills. It's your responsibility to keep your poise even in the midst of craziness. When you've got that mindset, it's so different. And so, again, on Thursday, for those who are not yet familiar with our approach, we're going to talk about that movement from victim to responsibility. And it's a huge shift that I think people have to go through. But if you ask the high-value question of how do I take full responsibility for my own outcomes, I think you're going to discover that the whole world changes. Your perspective goes 180 degrees differently, and that the normal sort of response that most bar takers have right now, which is, why is everyone ganging up on me? No one understands me. I don't know why my spouse, partner, lover, friend is mad at me. Today, oh, whoops, yesterday was Valentine's. Really? That kind of response. If you're in that mindset, if you're asking yourself, why is everything going wrong? It's not. It's just life. The better question then to ask is, how do you take full responsibility for your own outcomes? So those are our high-value questions. Let me just repeat them real quickly. Instead of asking, why don't you do as well as others, ask what's your current reality and catalog what you did to make you a winner to get to this point. Instead of asking, why didn't I start sooner, ask, what do I need to know and learn today to improve and get better? Instead of asking, for those for whom it's appropriate, why do I keep failing? Ask, why is my current reality so high? Catalog your resources and then build on those. For those that ask, why do I have to cram, or how am I going to cram right now? Instead, replace that with asking the question, what do I already know and how do I express it effectively on the exam? And for those who are asking, why is everything going wrong? Simply replace it by asking, how can I take full responsibility for my own outcomes? Well, I hope this is helpful information. I hope it gives you something to think about, something that's a little more positive. If you catch yourself making those low-value questions, hopefully you can switch them up to the high-value questions. And if you want to know more about this approach, again, I want to invite you to join us Thursday at 3 p.m. Just go to our website and you can reserve your seat. For those of you who are taking the exam next week, we will be back. You'll be in the exam probably in most cases, and we'll be turning our attention a little bit more now towards those who are starting on their journey towards July. But I want to just take a moment to thank all of you for being such loyal listeners among the February bar takers. I got a great notice today. Somebody said that, how did they put it? I was their bedtime, what did they say? This is my bedtime sermon. There you go. Preach, Brother Jackson. In any event, I'm so glad I've been able to be on this journey with you and to be part of it. I wish all of you the very best on your tests, wherever you're taking them. I hope for safe travel for all of you. I hope that all of you have a clear mind and a sense of your opportunity here to demonstrate the incredible things you've learned and know, and the ability to be great members of our profession. We've never needed you more in the profession of law than I think we do today. And so I wish each and every one of you the very best results. I look forward to seeing all of your names on the pass list. And with that, we'll sign off and talk to everybody else again next week. That's all for now. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.